Hi everyone, Dr. Lewis here. So this is our social sustainability lecture, and we are going to be going over this subject matter as the theme of our course. So sustainability is the ability for something to be maintained at a certain level or rate over a long period of time or indefinitely. And we're going to be combining that word with social, and I want to explain exactly what I mean when I say that. So, social sustainability is the process of considering how to maintain social balance in an interconnected world. So, there's a couple of subtopics that relate to this kind of larger umbrella topic. So, we are going to be discussing this idea of community cohesion for mutual benefit. And what that means is that unless you are both capable and want to run off into the middle of the woods and farm your own food and not pay taxes, that you have to live in a community of sorts. And that means different things for different people, but it can literally just mean that you might have gone to a grocery store or a restaurant, and that you're buying products that are made by someone else, sometimes not even someone that's in the same country, that you're being checked out by an individual that is not yourself. So that there's certain aspects of community cohesion that we support that is beneficial to us in order to help us live the way that we want and to benefit each other. Okay, so another topic we will be discussing is connectedness between groups of people. And there are various ways to address that topic. And I have a list of kind of subtopics that we'll be talking about. So one of them can be more to the direction of tolerance, compassion, and equal rights. The next can be something like access to information and resources. And then the last is common standards of behavior, discipline, rules, laws, and ethics. So all of these greater topics are ones that we will discuss throughout the semester. So we will touch more on these kind of as we go along. But these are all topics that we will be touching on when talking about kind of social balance and social sustainability. And then finally, the idea that violence or revolution are the cost or result of failure to invest in the social health of our society. So that if this cohesion and if this were together for mutual benefit, if something breaks down along the line, that leads to violence and / or revolution. Sometimes they go together, sometimes they don't. And I want to clarify that sometimes that the violence and revolution aren't necessarily a bad thing. If we're taking it in its broadest definition, pretty much every war would be a revolution of sorts. So, not necessarily bad, though they can be. But that looking at this kind of breakdown of social health, why it happens, and then the types of revolution or violence that occur because of it. Okay, so that's a broad definition. So it's basically thinking about this idea that we all exist in this world, and we cannot pretend that we aren't connected to one another, again, unless you run off into the woods. So this can be thinking about how we connect between all the countries of the world, or it can be a smaller microcosm of our immediate community. So Kennesaw State University, a university could be a community. A city can be a community. There can be little smaller communities within that city as well. So considering the questions of how do we relate to one another in a way that maintains social health and the greatest happiness possible, and how do we negotiate our way in an interconnected world? So really focusing on this idea that we do live in an interconnected world, and what are the both benefits and also sometimes consequences of that being true. Okay, and obviously those are questions we're going to be talking about all semester, so just kind of have them in your mind. All right, so I get to this slide and they're like, Dr. Lewis, why is there a penguin? So the reason I have this penguin is because I think that this is a good example of the idea that I'm talking about. So there is a woman walking in New Zealand, and as she's walking on the beach, she's on vacation, she's having a good time, She sees a little penguin, and these are tiny, tiny little cute penguins, and one of them's dead on the beach. And it happens, nature. So she doesn't think much about it, but over the course of her vacation, she sees the dead penguins pretty repeatedly. Like it happens over and over again. And when she asks questions, people tell her, oh, a dog got to it, or oh, it just happens, or maybe it got in a fight, or. And she was like, sometimes that makes sense, but I don't see bite marks, and it's a lot of penguins. So this led to basically a several year examination of what is happening to the fairy penguins. And it resulted in her finding a couple of solutions to why the fairy penguins are dying. And one of them is literally on the other side of the world. They had made a different rule about fishing and fishing populations. So commercial fishing rule changes basically led to a slight change in ecosystem where the ripple effects found its way all the way to the fairy penguin in Australia and New Zealand. So, and now there are many articles you can read about it, like that was a problem, but now they're saying that it's also global warming. There's also like a major commercial fishing dock was put up close to one of the major populations, and they're saying that has ripple effects as well. So there's a lot of different reasons that are kind of leading to these penguins dying, essentially of starvation. So like that's the end result, that she found out that these penguins are literally just starving to death. So essentially I think this helps illustrate it, because decisions that are made on the other side of the planet can have these ripple effects that lead to animals on the other side of the planet actually dying. And this sounds like a really depressing story, but I promise the fairy penguins are doing fine. They've been doing better in recent years. They're not extinct or going extinct. But it illustrates this point. It's kind of like the butterfly effect, that a butterfly's flapping wings can cause a hurricane on the other side of the world. And that's kind of what I want to think about, is how we're all interconnected and how decisions that might seem very, very, very local to you can have far-reaching effects. And again, I want to clarify that I don't necessarily mean this story to be about how awful humanity is because of these poor fairy penguins. That's not really the point of the story. It's more like thinking about how it is interconnected, and perhaps that change in fishing populations and fishing rules actually led to positive results that would offset some penguins dying. So don't think of it so much as like me guilting humanity for this decision, but more like we need to consider the ripple effects, that we need to understand that decisions that we make go beyond just the local. Okay, so let's move on from the penguin. So a couple of terms, and I am actually not going to read through and define all of these terms because they are in our Defining Culture and Identities chapter reading that you did just recently. So these are important terms, though, because we will be focusing on social, especially the social part. So we will be talking about cultures, how they relate to one another, how we fit in and relate to one another in different communities. So you should know the definition of all of these terms, and they are defined in our chapter reading. But see these as connected, as the lecture I'm giving now is connected to that chapter reading. Okay. This is also related to the idea of multiculturalism, which is related to the idea of maintaining a diverse set of cultures and religions within the same unified space. So you can, again, think of that as America, but you can also think of it as even all the way down to a city or a town. Okay, and this idea of a cultural contact zone, the idea is that a cultural contact zone is where two or more cultures intermingle. And what happens when two different cultures come into contact? So essentially what happens is when those two cultures come into contact, the idea is that they rub off on one another. So even when it is a hostile situation, So think about colonization throughout the years. Even when it is a hostile situation, you still rub off on one another to a certain extent, even if one culture is considered the one that comes out dominant. So if you want to think about, British colonists and then Native Americans. So there's a lot of intermingling of those two cultures, even though technically, one won the war. So, or the set of wars, it's not really one war. But so thinking about these ideas of the different cultures coming into contact and the ways in which we kind of rub off on one another when we're in contact with one another. Okay, so some sustainable thought processes to think about. So shifting from short-term to long-term goals, which is actually very difficult to do. So like a short-term goal, you have a test tomorrow. That's an easy goal to have. Like there's a time constraint. It's a very immediate. But this idea, like I sometimes see people say, put $5 away and save it every month. And then if you save $5 every month, by the time that you're 65, then you'll have a lot of money. And shifting to this long-term goal can be kind of difficult because in one way you can understand saving money is great, but in another way it's hard to visualize yourself being in your 60s or 70s before you can really benefit from saving that money. So the idea that we need to focus on trying to get to those long-term goals while recognizing that sometimes it is difficult to do so. Moving away from, or at least complicating the idea that cash profit is the only aspect that matters to a more balance sheet tally of success. So we talk about this a lot with businesses. So when you're examining a business, is the only thing that you should examine how much money or profit it made, or are there other factors that you should consider? Like, are they socially aware? Do they have sweatshops in other countries? And I'm acknowledging that people will have different opinions about that. That I have people who very eloquently argue that cash profit is the only thing that we should care about. And I have people who very eloquently argue the other side as well. So again, at least thinking about this idea that profit isn't necessarily the only thing to look at, that it's more complicated than that. Okay, so this idea that everything is connected rather than focusing on just one specific issue or just yourself as an individual, that doesn't mean that you can't think about yourself as an individual. That a healthy society starts with a healthy individual. So like you're kind of the beginning of it. You're the center of it. And thinking about you as being the center of it and then your ripple effects moving out from yourself. So this isn't to say like the individual doesn't matter at all, because you can't, it would say that you can't have a healthy society without healthy individuals to make it up. And then starting to see the world as a system or a set of interrelated parts where nothing grows forever and nothing lasts forever. So kind of acknowledging that idea that we're in a system that doesn't necessarily going to last for all of eternity. Okay, so some other questions that we're going to be talking about throughout the semester. What does it mean to live in a global world, a diverse world? Seeing everything and everyone is connected and is everything possibly having consequences and benefits? Why is it important to have different types of people represented in media, or is it? How do the concepts of gender, race, class, and others like religion affect how we see the world and are seen by the world? And how does the individual relate to others? Should we be concerned about events happening in other states, other countries? And what should be our involvement in other countries? So these are some ideas that we will touch on throughout the semester. And I hope that this lecture kind of helped clarify what our class theme is. If you have any questions at this point, always feel free to contact me, especially because this is our course theme. Anyway, so yeah, let me know if you have any questions.